glad you've chosen to join this session. There's the parallel session about resource assessment and in-field and lab assessment of soil health, but this session we'll be talking about COMET tools and spend a lot of time on COMET Planner. I'm Rachel Seaman-Varner, a senior soil health and biochar scientist with American Farmland Trust. And I have experience using all the COMET tools as I was with NRCS before coming over to AFT in the summer this year, and was involved in a lot of their carbon farming planning activities and climate smart initiatives. So got the opportunity to participate in trainings with COMET tools and use them. So I hope I can share that information with you today. That's my plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about regenerative agriculture and how it ties into as a natural climate solution. We'll talk generally about the COMET tools and then spend a little bit of time on COMET Energy, which is a simple tool to assess fuel reduction. We'll do COMET Planner and have a demonstration, and then go into kind of a brief overview of COMET Farm, but not in depth. And then I'll share some resources that the COMET team has put together. There is an appendix on this presentation that goes into COMET Farm in more depth. It's a more complicated tool. So if you want more information about COMET Farm, it's there at the end of these slides. And I can answer questions if you're interested in more talking about COMET Farm. So regenerative agriculture is really a natural climate solution. There are a number of different technologies that have been proposed to draw down CO2, and these can be pretty complicated and expensive. We are, by necessity, continuing to grow food, and so we can do so in a way that builds soil organic matter and carbon and can reduce greenhouse gases. So I have a figure here on the left that shows since cultivation, we've lost relative concentrations of soil organic carbon. And if we continue with intensive tillage and residue removal, there's the potential we'll continue to lose that carbon, but we can incorporate some practices like no-till, cover cropping, and other soil health management practices that can build back and regenerate that carbon. There's those benefits that build carbon, that make a system more adaptive and resilient and build healthy soils. There's also this tie-in with climate mitigation and the potential for drawing down carbon or sequestering carbon and managing other greenhouse gases like nitrous oxides and methane. And there is a study on the right-hand side here to estimate the potential of some of those practices in terms of reducing CO2 equivalents on an annual basis. And one thing here, so this is a study that was looking at different incentive levels of adoption. So it has some of those key practices in the soil health management system, like cover cropping and nutrient management and windbreaks and that sort of thing. So on that scale of potential impacts to climate, these are the estimates that are derived. One other key point that I've highlighted here is there are also these co-benefits that build a system, build resilience and build more adaptive systems that affect biodiversity and air quality and soil quality. And so these colored bars are those co-benefits. Not only are we looking at climate mitigation and calculating that impact, but there are also very important other benefits that happen from these practices. But there is this focus on quantifying the mitigative impacts of practices. And last year, USDA put out a climate smart initiative and climate smart agriculture and forestry practices list. So this list includes a bunch of different practices. There's different categories. One of those is soil health, and there are 13 practices. The common ones we think about: reduced tillage, cover cropping, crop rotations, that sort of thing. 13 practices in there with a quantifiable mitigative benefit. There's some other categories also: nitrogen management, which I think is also a key part of soil health management. There's grazing and restoration of lands and forest management and some rice practices too on this list. So this list is informed by some of the COMET tools and the work that COMET is built upon. That we also have a CARPE is a tool that AFT and ARS scientists developed called the Carbon Reduction Potential Evaluation Tool. And this tool combines some of that information about those quantifiable impacts with the adoption rates based on the census. So it's used to estimate how we can maximize the benefits of these practices by increasing adoption. And AFT and Bonnie actually put together these reports that are for each state that look at their agricultural sector contributions to greenhouse gas emissions, and then coupled it with the CARPE data. What is the potential adoption if we use some of these conservation practices? What would be that impact? How could we potentially reach a net zero emissions in the ag sector if we maximize those adoptive, those conservation practices? So these reports are coming out. We have 5 or 6 being released. Is that right, Bonnie? And then we'll be building up more. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
No, just, yeah, we'll have 5 or 6. I'll put the states in the chat that we'll have.
Oh, great. Great. Thanks. So the COMET tools are designed for use by agricultural producers who are interested in being part of the climate solution. And COMET stands for Carbon Management Emissions Tool, and it was developed with a partnership agreement between Colorado State University scientists and the NRCS. And it's an integrative web-based platform that has a couple of different options. So we'll talk about the COMET Energy tool, COMET Planner, and COMET Farm. And these have various levels of requirements and output, but they are based on some foundational quantification methods. So one thing the COMET team does really, really well, I mean, they do a lot of things very well, but they have a lot of training resources. And I've pulled this directly from one of the COMET trainings as a side-by-side comparison. So this is something that they present looking at COMET Farm and COMET Planner, because those two are often confused. So COMET Farm is a very detailed field-specific analysis. It has a flexible baseline, so you can really adjust for a specific management system with a lot of detail. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what's required. So it does require a lot of information input. It requires 20 years of management history generally, and then it's based on specific field definitions. You can define multiple parcels, so it has site-specific information. You can download a report and save projects when you create an account. And the time, because of the depth of the history, the management history, and the information that goes into it, and you can make reports for very complex operations that have croplands, livestock, agroforestry practices. So the amount of time that it takes to invest in a COMET Farm report varies by the complexity of the operation and the details of the management history. So it can take a day to get the information all entered, and it actually can take a little bit more time to get a report, like, you know, on the scale of 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the complexity. But with COMET Planner, it's a much more streamlined input, and it also generates just regional average estimates for each conservation practice. There is a fixed baseline, so you really don't start with any site-specific or management-specific details. You just have these emission reduction coefficients that we'll talk about that go into the calculations, just adding those practices. But because of that, you don't need a lot of background information. You just enter a state and county that would place the location within an MLRA. and select the conservation practices. You can download a report, but you cannot save the projects, partly because it's pretty quick and easy to develop a project. And then you can just go back and, adjust or, redo the project in a pretty short amount of time. And it is just 4 clicks to get to generate an estimate. I added COMET Energy. Can you see that third bar?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Because I see the gallery of folks. So COMET Energy is streamlined and is really just an estimate of fuel reduction savings. So you start with that basic data. What is the fuel savings? And you enter that. It gives a quick calculation of what the impact is on greenhouse gases and energy. And it's very quick. It's just one data entry point. And I'll talk about that a little bit more detail. So this is COMET Energy. It's a standalone tool that allows you to calculate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions based on fuel savings. And you would use this tool as kind of a supplement to COMET Planner or COMET Farm, partly because some of the practices don't incorporate fuel savings. So like if you're converting to a no-till operation, the calculations for COMET Farm and COMET Planner don't take into account reduced passes and reduced gasoline. So this would be a supplement to add to the total calculation. So you have that beige bar there in the middle where you enter the annual fuel savings in gallons, CCF, or kilowatt hours, depending on the information that you have. And it generates a summary. So it's the emission reductions and the energy savings are based on some calculations from the U.S. energy inventory estimates for gases. Let me get that exactly right. Yeah, U.S. Energy Information Administration's voluntary reporting of greenhouse gases program. So it just takes that emission coefficient for the type of gasoline or type of fuel, and then calculates it by the quantity of the fuel that was reduced. And so you'll get a summary down here at the bottom that estimates the reduced CO2 equivalent per year or the energy savings in BTUs. It doesn't generate a report necessarily, but you can print the page. So it puts, the output looks like the screen you see, and it includes that summary. Wait a second, how did we go backwards? Okay, here we are. Sorry about that. All right, so COMET Planner is, we'll spend a little bit more time on COMET Planner and walk through a demonstration. It is a quick and easy assessment. It provides generalized estimates of the mitigation impacts of these practices, and they're based on emission reduction coefficients, and those have been developed over many years, and they align with some the USDA methods, and they are kind of based on DayCent as well, and I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more. But these are estimates for the greenhouse gas reduction impacts of the practices, and they're based on a larger scale area. They're organized and averaged over MLRAs, which are the major land resource areas. And just kind of for context on that, we have 267 major land resource areas, and they range from 3 square miles up to more than 70,000 square miles. So there's a lot of variability in that, but these estimates are very helpful with making these generalizations. And for COMET Planner, the Positive values denote an increase in carbon sequestered or a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, and negative values denote decreases in carbon sequestered or increases in emissions. So they are coded, they're colored. Positive is blue, that's what we're looking for, and negative is red, that's what we don't want to see. And that's consistent throughout the way COMET Planner displays the data. When we go into COMET Planner, they always have this pop-up screen, this info screen that includes any updates. And the COMET team is pretty on task to resolve glitches or to update information. There was a major version update just last month. So COMET Planner and COMET Farm are both on the 3.0 version right now. And this update, most importantly, incorporated the 30 centimeter depth estimates for soil carbon and greenhouse gases of the DECENT model that was the most recent model used. Initially, earlier versions had been based on the 20 centimeter depth, so it's more fine-tuned and more rigorous now. They also updated the interface and included Spanish translations and incorporated irrigation and more cover crop implementation. So they're pretty on top of evolving this tool. This is the user interface, and I'm not sure, you may not be able to read it, but we will go into the demonstration that'll be more visible. This is what it looks like and the 4-step process of starting a project. So the first step is to just name the project and identify the state and county that will place it in an MLRA for the average estimates. And second step, you select the class of conservation practices. That would be one of 5 cropland, grazing lands, cropland to herbaceous cover, restoration of disturbed lands, or woody plantings. And then that pops up a menu on step 3 that gives you the conservation practice standards available for that class. And then also, once you select the CPS, you get the implementation. So for example, what I'm showing here is I've selected cover crop as the conservation practice standard, and it's opened up these 8 options for implementation. And so you would select the closest one to what you're planning. And for cover crop, for example, we're looking at a legume or a non-legume cover crop on irrigated or non-irrigated land, and whether it's tilled or no tilled. So there are eight implementations for cover crop. Some of the others vary depending on the complexity. Like for example, mulching has one implementation. So they've fine-tuned some of these that have more complex, possibilities of implementing. And then the next step is to define the acreage that each of these practices are on. And then the calculation, the emission reduction is calculated with that emission reduction coefficient and the acres. And you get the final calculation of CO2e per year. And then you can download the results. So this is what the interface looks like with the estimates. And so this is the approximate carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission reductions in tons of CO2e per year. And the totals are on the far right-hand side. For this demonstration, I've added 4 practices. So I have selected cover crop, that is a legume on irrigated land with 50% nitrogen reduction. And then also fertilizer management with reduced fertilizer application. Then I've gone from intensive till to no till as an example on irrigated land, and decreased the decreased fallow frequency and perennial crop rotation is the implementation for conservation crop rotation for practice standard. with each of the practice standards, there's an I for more information. You can click on that, and I can show that in the demo too. And it will give you an option to look at the one-page COMET description, which is informative, and then it will also directly link to the current conservation practice standard from NRCS. So with those practice standards, or those practices selected, I added acreage for 50 acres as just this example. And as you see, moving to the right, it has a quantification, and that's based on those emission reduction coefficients for carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane, and then a total. So for the legume cover crop, we're seeing an increase in sequestered carbon or reduced carbon emissions of 50 tons in CO2e per year. But with nitrous oxide, there is an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So the total of the practice is about 36 a reduction of 36 tons of CO2e per year from that practice. And then we have the total for all of the practices down in the bottom right.
Rachel, can I jump in and ask one question? This is Chris.
Yeah, sure.
Can you explain why nitrous oxide, why that's a negative, like what is it about adding that cover crop with a 50% fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer reduction that increases the amount of nitrous oxide?
Yeah, it's really an interesting question. I don't have the background on the emission reduction coefficient. I don't know if Bonnie has more details, but with adding organic nitrogen and with that input of organic nitrogen through the legume, it would be another source for active release and nitrogen cycling. It's curious to me because with the 50% nitrogen reduction, you would also expect that net would be a little lower.
Right.
And Bonnie, looks like Bonnie's popping up on screen. Maybe she has some questions or some more information to add.
Just to reiterate the same thing that Rachel said, that it's a little confusing, probably trying to be on the conservative side, not to overestimate the climate benefit, but
Right. Okay, sorry, I didn't want to get us sidetracked, but it was just such a curious standout figure that I thought it was worth asking about. So thank you.
Yeah, I think there are lots of these little questions. We're trying to get these approximations, and I think it would be interesting to go through all the different implementations for cover crop and see how the impact on nitrous is changed.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is what we have to work with on these estimates for now, and maybe they'll fine tune it as more data is available. So this is the way it's displayed in the user interface, but you can download a report, and the report looks like this, which I don't prefer to the user interface, but this is PDF, and you can print it and use it as a display. So this is the same information, just in a report form. But I'm going to go to COMET Planner, and hopefully you're seeing that on my webpage.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris. So here's that pop-up menu with the updates, and this happens every time you use it. So right now, this is the main update, their new version. They may be in the next quarter have a new info page, but you just cancel out of that. And here we are with the graphical interface. And I've mentioned that the COMET team has lots of resources. Here on the very first page, we have this introductory video you can watch. It's about 6 minutes, and it walks through the steps. But this is the 4 steps to get a report. So I figured we could just have a little interaction I will name this project Soil Health Stewards Demo and select a state. Anyone want to volunteer some input? Just, we have a pretty small group, I think, so you can just unmute yourself and suggest a state and county.
Let's do Wisconsin, Waukesha County.
Okay. So once you select the state, it will Waukesha. All right, so we've got our state and county that places us in that MLRA for the averages. And here are the classes of practices. Shall we do cropland, Paul?
Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay. Are you the only person from Wisconsin? Because you might be the guinea pig here.
This is Kirsten. I'm also from Wisconsin.
Oh, great. Do you want to select a practice standard?
I would practice grazing lands.
Oh, grazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put practice standard. So I'm having a hard time seeing your screen. I don't know if anybody else is. And
Oh,
maybe
the
it's just my
size of
computer
it?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can zoom.
Is anybody? Oh, I just zoomed you out, but you're okay. That worked. Oh,
Okay.
okay. So practice standard. I guess cover crops.
Okay. So here are the 8 different implementations of cover crop, and it's legume or non-legume, irrigated land or non-irrigated, and then tilled or no tilled. Those are kind of the options, and then the 50% or 25% fertilizer in reduction.
I would go with no till. Yeah, with that second one.
Legume, legume with no-till irrigated cropland.
Sure.
And a 50% nitrogen reduction. Okay. So that added the conservation practice here in step 4, and we can just select an acreage. Kirsten, you wanna?
100.
100. That's a good one. So as soon as you select and add the acreage, it does the calculation for you. So here we are netting a reduction of 35 tons of CO2e per year. And you can go back up. So let's go back up and we can add grazing lands. So if this is an operation, Kirsten, do you want to select a practice here?
Rangeland planting.
Great.
Yeah.
So we have one option, which is seeding forages to improve rangeland. So that will be the implementation, and then we can add that to how many acres?
100 acres.
Great. So it instantly calculates the CO2e reduction. And let's just look at one other, I'm just going to say woody plantings. So this would be, a whole operation that's pretty diverse, right? Got some cropland, some rangeland, some woody planting. So let's do like a windbreak. And we'll replace cropland with woody plants. And we'll do that on, say that's just 15 acres. So with the calculations here, now we have a total with these woody plantings that are sequestering a lot of carbon and above ground and below ground biomass, we have a total of 738 tons of CO2e reduced or sequestered. So that's pretty streamlined. Anybody want to try anything else or change this up a little bit?
I just had some questions that about it overall. So yeah. I wear this hat of restoration agriculture, and we really promote rotational grazing, not so much through the land trust, but through my other work. And I've just, some of the calculators I've seen, I'm wondering how intensive management do you take into consideration with the credits for grazing? Like, so when we're working with producers, and I can think of a couple in Waukesha County, that, you know, they're moving their livestock every day. They're planting like really diverse pastures. They're grazing, really keeping their grazing heights really tall, just doing like a fantastic job. And I'm wondering, and sometimes I think maybe they're not getting credited enough. I don't know, like what standards were used for grazing lands, you know, for input.
Yeah, let's take a look. I'm going to add this non-irrigated improvement. And we can, I'll just add a number for, what's that? 25. It's not letting me delete that. So we'll just go with 10. Huh. It's odd. There's something strange going on with that. What I wanted to do is pull up this info. So for prescribed grazing, let's take a look at this. This is the practice summary, and then how the practice implementation for prescribed grazing. So,
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
okay, sure. Yeah, they provide some background on how they reach these estimates, but you know, it is pretty generalized, and as they fine tune it, I think it could get improved, but this is what.
Yeah, and I feel like probably more research needs to be done as well. You know,
Right.
Sorry, I have a wild dog. I'm gonna mute myself.
Can I add something, Rachel?
Please, Bonnie.
Because we've wondered about this. Rachel and I have talked about this and how the emission reduction coefficient that the COMET tools, based on the DACENT model underlying all of this, seems to use is pretty low. Like it's usually around like 0.05 tons per acre, something. But if we look at other studies, other estimates, they're using things like 0.5, which is 10 times more. And so I think part of it is probably COMET is being on the really conservative side, because you're right, Kirsten, like we don't have a lot of data on the benefits of the system that you described. And so part of it is then the difficulty of having little data, but trying to have a tool that predicts what rotational grazing will do across the whole country, no matter where you're farming. So I think it's pretty conservative right now. And I think you're feeling that people aren't getting enough credit is kind of my feeling too. And we're looking to improve those.
Thank you.
That was a great opportunity to show those extra details that are available. And here's the link to the conservation practice standard. So that was helpful. So here we are with this whole system that we've estimated the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And we have this total here of 738 tons. I also wanted to show this greenhouse gas equivalencies calculator. So this can be helpful, taking that kind of abstract number and translating it into something relatable and concrete. So we can select emissions data in step 1. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the number is, 738 tons. And it will show the results of that this reduction in CO2e is equivalent to emissions that come from 159 vehicles driven for 1 year, or 1.8 million miles. And then you can scroll through this and select relatable illustrations of what that looks like. What does the reduction equivalent, what does it mean in the context of other things that are more concrete? So it's a very handy tool developed by EPA and available there. So let's go back to here. Any other questions about the demo? I'm sorry, anybody want to try out anything else? It's pretty user-friendly and gives you those estimates. So I already showed you the greenhouse gas equivalence calculator, and you can select a different types of comparisons, passenger vehicles or tree seedlings, to kind of take the abstract term and make it relatable. And it's useful in communicating as you're developing conservation plan or evaluating targets. So I did want to ask, kind of open up some discussion. What, as you take this back to your day-to-day, going back into the real world, what kind of challenges do you anticipate in talking with farmers about climate mitigation? And how could COMET Planner be used to maybe inspire more conservation? Anyone have thoughts to share on this? I think these can be difficult conversations to have, but wondering if you have experience or thoughts how you might navigate that. And just feel free to unmute because I can't really see anyone.
Rachel, this is Chris. One of the things that I sort of think back about from sort of what is a good use of COMET Planner, and it seems to me that if you're somebody working for a land trust or working for a public agency, that it is helpful for, I think, fundraising purposes and project purposes to be able to say, we are going to work with, 25 producers over the next year. And we hope that as a result of that, and over a certain period of time, that they will adopt these practices, which means this level of reduction in CO2 emissions, and that for certain funding communities is very important. So using COMET Planner as a way, not on the individual farm basis, but to sort of say, as a result of our work, these are the benefits that are going to come from that strikes me as sort of one important way for folks to be able to use COMET Planner, is less on having that conversation. Not to say that you wouldn't do it with individual farmers, but I can see a whole host of other uses for it outside of that farm-based conversation, that it is with funders, particularly about what the benefits of doing this kind of work are.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Kirsten. I would totally chime in with that. I feel like with younger farmers, they would be interested in making decisions on their property playing with this. But with our community, older farmers, maybe not so much. But as we take and then some people just ask, what would be the best practice? And so this is a cool thing to show them if this is their talking point, so I feel like, yeah, it's a really great tool.
Great.
Hi, this is Janice. I wanted to chime in. I think it'll be great from our land use perspective in our land use planning, to show potential for fundraising. Like Chris said, it'll be awesome. And then we have what I'm calling a conservation cohort of farms coming through for protection that are adjacent within a sub-watershed. So I think from that standpoint, sub-watershed planning and, just demonstrating to the group of them the potential without focusing on one particular farm. I think that's going to be really good. And then we also have lots of climate planning going on, and I think that'll really help address some of those broader reports that deal with climate everything, baseline, and then adaptation, mitigation, and so those projections will help.
Excellent. Any challenges you can anticipate, or?
Is there a way to view like the back end processes of the calculator, like what the calculation formulas are or what the model looks like?
Yeah, you
Um,
can.
okay, I was just curious because I know the question would probably come up with, this, from a user interface standpoint, it looks great, but how do we arrive at these numbers?
They do have a full report that you can pull up. It's under the info. I should be projecting it now, but under COMET Planner, under info, resources, there's a COMET Planner report that you can pull up. And I think you have to enter your just information, but it's an immediate download and it will give you the whole spreadsheet with all the emission reduction coefficients and how that's broken down. It doesn't give a full like bibliography of review, but it does have the entire spreadsheet that you can peruse.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
I guess the only challenges that I see are really, these are pretty general. So I guess I'll go back to managed grazing, just having different numbers for different management styles. So for example, in NRCS standards, if people rotate their cattle between 1 and 3 days, between 3 and 7 days, or, beyond, just when more data comes in, capturing that better, I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that these are estimates and that there's some, a margin of error and variability in how those are really applied on, because these are generalized, very generalized.
Yeah. Rachel, I'm pointing out that it is 1:15.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any more slides, but we should probably wrap up pretty soon.
Can I take just 2 minutes?
Sure,
Okay.
you betcha.
I just wanted to quickly show COMET Farm. It's, like I said, more in depth and site-based. It's a whole farm assessment. It's based on the DACENT model, and the USDA's Blue Book is often referenced. So it pulls in soil properties and weather and management systems and production, and can be used for all operations and complex operations with livestock, forestry, agroforestry, plantings, and croplands. So you can use any and all. There's a lot of input on the front end. Like I mentioned, 20 years of management history, and then the projections are for 10 years. So it takes a little bit of time to set up, and then depending on the complexity and how many modules you have will affect the time and the input and the amount of data. But the reports that are generated are more detailed, and even from here, you can get more detail on the variability and the distribution of the variability for the estimates. So you kind of get what you put in. So just the last quick thing is that the COMET team has lots of resources that you can use. They're really responsive. So if you ever do email them, they reply pretty quickly with questions, but they have tons of tutorials. Mostly the tutorials are on COMET Farm. There is a YouTube channel, they have videos, they have that COMET Planner video, and then a number, like, I don't know, 8 or so COMET Farm focused videos. And they also offer weekly Zoom trainings for the different types of modules in COMET Farm. And that's a really good place to get questions answered. I don't know how long they're going to be continuing these, but it is once a week that they offer these. And there's a need help widget on every page that you can click, and it opens up a search engine where you can add questions and it'll pull up resources. So there's lots out there to get your feet wet and figure out how to use these tools. And they do a really nice job, I think. So that, I think, wraps up everything. And thanks so much. I hope that was helpful.